You are listening to the How to Be Irish podcast with me, Una Harty. I can't believe we've over 10 episodes now. It's been really nice to hear the positive feedback as the podcast has grown. I'm really enjoying chatting to all the different guests. Today's guest is no exception. It's Jenny Maguire. She's the president of the Trinity College Dublin Students' Union. I myself, quite a few years ago, was on the Students' Union as a full-time officer, so I know exactly what her job is like. It's not an easy one. And we're going to chat a lot about different issues that are facing the youth of today. And of course, today is a very important day because today is the polling day for the general election in Ireland. If today's the 29th of November, make sure you get out and vote if you can. I'm really excited to see what happens with this general election. A lot of parties are saying, it's a historic one. Is it a historic one? We'll find out in due course. So gurv míle as éisteacht and feici mehu an céad or Ella. Slán live. Jenny Maguire is the president of Trinity College Dublin Students' Union, Aontas Mac Léinn Chláiste na Tríonóide. At the 2024 Gay and Lesbian Awards, she was nominated for LGBT+ Youth Trailblazer. She is a passionate advocate for housing rights, transgender healthcare, and Palestinian liberation, having served as a negotiator of the Trinity Palestinian encampment. She also dabbles in comedy, much to the disappointment to her family, friends, and all who see her perform. Well, you got a laugh out of me, Jenny. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so delighted.
It's great to have you here because I myself, a few years ago, was part of the Trinity College Dublin Students' Union and I was the comms and marketing officer. So the office that you're sat in there, I was literally just the one next door.
I'm so glad we have that trauma bond together. It's an unspoken trauma pleasure that we will hold for the rest of our lives.
My God, stop. I literally, when I messaged you and I reached out to you to ask you about this, I was like, I hope that you are okay.
I mean, there's truly no better job than seeing Trinity students suffer every day. And so, but yeah, it's a crazy job, as I'm sure you remember. But
yeah, it's a really, really unusual role. I don't think you can quite understand it unless you go through it yourself. But you're in November now, so you're kind of in the swing of it, and hopefully you'll get through the year in one piece. So this episode is going to be going out on polling day, so the day that the Irish people are going to the polling stations to vote in our general election. And there's obviously, the whole media cycles have been inundated with politicians begging for votes and all that kind of stuff. I really want to get into what the youth are looking for. What are the students talking about? You've got your ear to the ground there in Trinity College, so I'd love to really delve into that first and foremost. What do you think the students are thinking? Are they voting left as expected?
I think they are voting left, but even then, I think there is so much discontent and disenfranchisement with electoral politics at the minute. We went to the student bar, the PAV, last week with a giant sign that said, "What aren't you voting for?" Instead of asking people like what they want to see, which is kind of the usual line that you get in various box pops and all, we wanted to know exactly what students and researchers didn't want. And something that came up that really stood out was the difference between the messaging being put out by the main three parties and even the majority of smaller parties. The difference between that messaging and what we were hearing from young people, something that came up on multiple times was that people don't want more immigration controls. It's like unheard of in the current electoral cycle. People are seeing that it's being used to justify the housing crisis, being used to justify the healthcare crisis, as if we haven't grown up with them alongside. I remember when I was in secondary school and sitting in my classroom during the Syrian refugee crisis, and Ireland was only taking a couple of hundred, and my class being outraged by it. Like, why aren't we taking more people in? These people need our help, whilst also dealing with the housing crisis. I think we have a very short memory, and that benefits ultimately the politicians that put us in this situation and hurts marginalized people more. Something as well that was coming up obviously is housing. The student experience has become a tiered experience. It's kind of like a pay what you can access, like for extra perks and like a video game. The idea of getting involved into societies, getting involved in your student union, getting involved in so many different areas, it's just so class based that so many people are left completely without a student experience because they're commuting for 3 to 4 hours a day. They are working a full-time job as well as doing a full-time studies, as well as being a full-time parent, as well as being a full-time carer. And like that is what the student experience is. And I'd say it's increasingly becoming a rarity that you have people in like an early 2000s college movie.
When I was in first year, I was in halls. I was lucky enough to get a spot in Trinity halls where a lot of the first years would be. And I remember a room at the time was, I think it was €500 a month to rent. And that would be with your own bathroom. And that was considered expensive at the time. Now, I think when I was on campus then in final year, it was nearly about €1,000 a month to rent. So even in that short space of time, you could kind of see like how much it had gone up. And I think also in that time as well, you started to see what you were saying, where it became a thing that the student experience was only really being experienced by people who were from Dublin, probably like lived at home, so that they were able to have accommodation and they didn't have to do those 3-4 hour commutes, as you said. So I'm from County Limerick. So I think about if I was going to college today, being able to find accommodation in Dublin, it's so difficult. And all the extracurriculars that I got involved with, which like literally they're all my interests, and they made my college experience so special. Like I wouldn't have been able to do that. I wouldn't have been able to get involved in the SU and all that kind of stuff. And that's what really shapes who you are. So I think there's a bit more of a long-term impact there when it comes to students, as think of them as citizens, and how college helps you to become an involved and an informed citizen, so that you can partake in society and do so in a mindful way, an empathetic way. Because if you're running between classes and you're not able to make friends, you're not able to have those deep connections, you're not able to go to the social events, it impacts your experience, but also impacts you in later life as well from the experiences that you do gain in college. Do you see that much with the students these days? Like, do you feel like college is a different thing altogether? Maybe perhaps that it's just kind of like a means to an end in a sense?
I think so. I think it's been completely transformed. Something that has happened that college has just become like there's no sense of community, and I think this is outside of the university as well, and that how like loneliness takes hold and how like rise of mental health issues takes hold is because people don't have community anymore. People are a group of individuals, and nothing makes you feel more like an individual when you see the people who went to the private schools getting to be a part of the debating societies or the drama society or whatever, any society or any club, or just normal things that people would want to do, when seeing them get to do it, but because you have work responsibilities and childcare responsibilities, you have no option to get involved within that. And nothing makes you feel more alone and isolated than those experiences and that inequality. I think sometimes I struggle with the idea of what do the students want, because the student experience is fundamentally one of inequality. It is this the student experience is it should be defined by how unequal and how varied it is because of these barriers of lack of accommodation, lack of financial supports, hidden fees within your studies, all these different sorts of things. And it's only getting worse, and it's been just blown up by rises in inflation and the cost of living crisis. And I think so when students hear like that politicians are going around and their main thing is immigration, like Trinity is an incredibly international university, and we are shaped and made better because of the immigrants that come in. And I know some people might say, it's like, oh, it's not them we're talking about. And it's like, yeah, because you just want to punish the poor ones, or the ones that are on the streets, which is something that we do to Irish homeless people as well. The issue is the lack of housing. And so the lack of supports and treating each other like fellow people in a community.
I like the way you asked the question to the students. You said, what do you not want, as opposed to what you do want? Because I think, I mean, we do hear it a lot. Obviously, we need to hear it a lot. In terms of the student body, like you mentioned, there seems to be quite an agreement in what they do want. But do you find with the rise in far right or more right-leaning politics in the world, do you think that's being reflected in the student population, or do you think those voices are just really loud on social media?
I think the voices are just very loud. Even within the college, there are groups that, you know, specifically target the union because of its its progressive nature, as all unions are, and they have always been. In a student union capacity, it becomes a question of like, what is the purpose of a union if not to fight for the most vulnerable and to fight for the most oppressed? If we were fighting for workers, that's what we'd be doing. And so we're fighting for students, and that's what we're doing. And we are fighting for workers, for PhDs. And so, you know, it's the lines are so blurred of what the union is, and I know what the union is, and I ran and I was elected on that. And I think there's small groups of people in all areas of life that, because we've been taught, let's listen to both sides, the both sides don't carry the same weight. And I think that's important that we don't forget. Something that we've been really pushing is this general election to students is going home and having those tough conversations with your parents about the rise of the far right. I think it's really easy to get swept up in the catchy slogans, and within the real fear and sense of abandonment that people in communities right across this country have. I think so many of us have been just completely abandoned without that sense of community. And so I think so many people have found solace in that hatred, which is terrible because they feel there's no other opportunity and no other option. But I know, just from talking to people in my area, I live not too far from when all this stuff kicked off in Coolock during the summer. I know, like, when you actually talk to people, the vast majority are not like right-wing agitators that are causing harm within the community. They're people who are going off the information that they've been fed, their understanding of the world, and they are acting accordingly from the fear created by others because they feel afraid. And that fear and that the kind of lack of abundance that they feel they've been taught is in the world and they've been made feel is something that we are encouraging our students and our researchers to go home and have those chats about with their family, because students have always been more progressive, but it's about making sure that that goes back into the community as well.
What kind of advice do you give the students in relation to chatting to perhaps older generations?
It's no judgment. I know some people don't have it in you to go like, okay, I'm going to sit and listen to this person give me right-wing talking points that they read online. I'm like, I don't expect them to, and I don't want them to. But it's if you have the capacity to sit down and pull it back to the real human side, that we all want the same thing. We all want security. We all want safety. We all want a sense that the world has any kind of justice. And so to go and sit with your family and listen to them and, like, not outright shut them down, be like, can I offer you a different perspective? Because the far right and a lot of the far right talking points, they don't offer a lot of solutions. It's all about what the issues are. And so if they're naming issue after issue of, like, there's unvetted and coming in and this, that, and the other, all lies, they're pointing to an issue. They're not pointing to a solution. And I think what people really need is a solution, in that we are one of the richest countries in the European Union. And when I say that to people, they often say, no, we're not. I don't feel that. Exactly. You don't feel it. And that is what we need to be looking to. That is the issue we need to be looking at. That really this kind of scarcity mindset that we've been taught to have is hurting us. But what I would, to pull back to what the advice side, it's about seeing each other as people. And I have all the patience in the world, and I think it only does good to actually provide people other options and a piece of hope. I had to quote the Hunger Games: "Hope is the only thing stronger than fear." And so, that's that's kind of our main message, and our main slogan for our campaign for the general election is "Fight the real enemy," the Sinead O'Connor quote, because I think we all have a shared enemy, and it's not the refugee in the tent; it's the billionaire in the suit.
And that's what they do. They just want to get us fighting amongst each other so they can distract us.
I was like speaking to people in my area, and that's actually something that they identified. Like, they were telling me about this video that was going around right wing Twitter, and like the caption of it was like, it just was absolute lies, and it was about like a African woman is given a house straight away, and the Irish woman next to her is out in the streets, and that was not what the video was, but that's what they were pointing to, and it was all a load of nonsense. But something that the person identified is that like by putting by putting those two next to each other, they're trying to divide us. And I said, yes, they are trying to divide us, but why? They're trying like
Yes.
why are they trying to divide us? Because we've seen what we can do when we all come together. We've seen the water charges protests. We've seen oh my God, first before you get to the 1916 rising, you have to learn about the 1913 lockout. And there's a reason why they're connected, because they're a group of people coming together for a shared cause, for a dream of better, even when every piece of logic that they've been taught is telling them not to. And though things fail and things don't work, everything we do exists within the broader historical and political context that we exist in. And so by daring to act and by daring to take solution based approach instead of just trying to just spout racist nonsense, we actually can try and do it better. And so I think that's far more impactful than anything that the right wing can say.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a fantastic, I suppose, a lecture that Bernie Sanders gave in, like, I think it was like 2002 or 2003 or something. And he was talking about how exactly the right do this, how they will create these fake pieces of information and pin people against each other. He was delivering it to like a class of high school students or something like that. And all the comments were like, oh my God, because this was like, the video was re-released like post US election results. And everyone was like, oh my God, we weren't listening to him 20 years ago and we're still not listening to him now, you know? There have been those moments, like you said, the water charges protests, or for example, I'm here in Valencia in Spain and there was the horrific floods. I went to a protest there the weekend before last. It's the biggest protest I've ever been to in my entire life. You had everyone from the grannies to the teenagers to the middle-aged men, like everyone was there because they were all united in the same thing, and it was quite moving and emotional. So I think when you find those moments and you realize, yes, we are all in it together. And just to go back to, you mentioned the scarcity mindset. I think that is very interesting, because when you brought that up, it got me thinking about Irish people. And I suppose there's always this joke around Irish people, and we're mad to get a house, you know, whereas like in Europe, they're maybe known for renting, and it's more socially acceptable to be a renter for life. Where do you think our scarcity mindset comes from? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm going to pull it back to food. I'm going to pull us back to food, that so many cultures across the world have such rich food culture. And in Ireland, our food culture, though it exists, it's a lot of it is stuff that was made to survive. And it wasn't a basis of like a delicacy or like things that we've expanded upon. It's coddle. It's well, that's a Dublin in me, but it's like it is those basic things. Food has been such a uniting force, and a sense like it's used to show abundance. That's why we have big feasts. When the national dishes and the most iconic pieces of culinary experiences within a country is based on the colonial legacy, that people were made to be homeless, that people were made to live in poverty, and that's what we still experience today, then we can never experience abundance, because it feels that it could be taken away from us at any point. And even like how we talk about, I was talking to my mom the other day, and she was like, but like, isn't it good that we have millionaires here? And I said, what do you get from them? Because it feels like someone could take them away. And I think we're all taught that, you know, what we have could be easily taken by the next person, and we're all fighting for ourselves. And I just think that's a damaged people. And that's why we have to try and stay firm. That's why you get the house, because they can't take that away if I've bought it.
Yeah, that's it. It translates into a lot of aspects of Irish society. Housing obviously being one of the big ones. I never thought about the food thing, but that's really, really interesting angle to look at it. Like these ideas of quite plain foods
If they can control the food, then they control how you can move around the world, what energy you have, how far you can expand in your mind. Because if you're worried about food, it's such a necessity, then maybe you aren't looking around and saying, hold on, the economic models need to change. And so it's such a powerful thing.
And not to mention, again, not being able to use our own language as well. Take away the language, you take away the soul of a people, etc. Where did you learn to become interested in politics? How did you get into it to begin with?
I was never in any kind of youth groups that were like politics focused. I was never in a young party or like a Portland and Oak or a youth spun out thing. I've just been someone who really, I always call myself stubbornly optimistic. I've always been someone that despite everything that's been thrown at me in my life, I still believe in better. And it's that, and well, some people might get shut down by things. When things happen to me, I take it as an ignition and using it to go forward. And so I kind of see politics in everything, in that when my twin brother, who was too shy to speak up about his diabetes but needed to eat during class times, I would be the one that would be like, excuse me, he needs to eat. So many family experiences that have just shaped me. And then whether it's in school with climate stuff, just being in an all boys school as a trans woman on the north side of Dublin, you know, I never compromised myself, and I always stuck to my guns. Sometimes I adapted for safety, but I inherently didn't compromise. I was still myself throughout.
When did you realize that you were trans, and what was that like for you?
I mean, like it's kind of constant. I had the language for it at 11, but it was that I went to a mixed primary school, and in those settings, gender is so things aren't gendered. That like you are children. You are a group of people that are just there and you're kids, and that's what's most important. But then when I went to the all boys secondary school, suddenly I felt I stuck out with like a sore thumb, that I was like, oh, there's something not right here, and that like I just felt so fundamentally different to everyone else there. And I always knew who I was, but I just kind of needed, it was about being given the agency to explore that. And that was something that for all of my teenage years I not really explored, but I came into and I owned.
How was that experience for you? That must have been extremely difficult, like especially if you were in a boys' school. My God.
I think I look back at it with rose tinted glasses a little bit, in that like I I was still the prettiest one in the school. No. And I always I look back at it, and I experienced more misogyny than I did transphobia, because that misogyny
Wow.
is such a powerful weapon, and that is used against people. And it is just everywhere in our society, whether we want to address that or not, or just because we haven't found an EDI training to get rid of it doesn't mean it's not there. And so I look back in my secondary school, but like it was hard. My mom struggled at first with it, and my dad did too, and now they're my biggest supporters. And it's just really, it was hard, but I every year going back to school I would just cry and I'd cry. But I've taken so much from those experiences that I use today, good and bad. I still was the only girl, and so any achievement I had, I felt belittled because of it, or I was bossy, or I was told I was showing off, or I was bragging. Anything I would do, but things that the boys would say that were the exact same, they would never be told that I had to be put in my place. And that's kind of stuff that I still carry with me, and I have to comfort myself on. But there's so many other things I have so much strength from, and there was also a lot of love there from a few people.
It's amazing that you look back on it. I suppose you say rose tinted glasses, but it sounds like you kind of took strength from it and have
Yeah.
channeled that strength into your work today, which is a real positive. Did you come out then when you were in secondary school, or was it in
I
college? Or
Well, like in secondary school, I didn't quote unquote come out, but I would go from about fourth year. I would go in every day with a curly blow dry that I learned to do myself. I would speak right up the octave. I was a substitute teacher's worst nightmare because anytime they sat down, they're like, oh my God, no one briefed me on this little girl. And I remember once I wore high-waisted jeans into class once there was a non-uniform day, and it was like the world stopped. Everyone was like, oh my gosh. But it was more that like, it was an unspoken thing.
Did you feel accepted then in the class as a sense?
It was strange that like in the class, I was in my classes and like within the group of my year, like everyone just kind of knew me and this, that, and the other. But then I didn't realize how different really. I was treated like a girl, and all the goods and bads of what it's like to be in such a masculine environment as a woman. But then when I'd go like downstairs to other classes or like I'd interact with the other years, oh my God, they didn't know how to deal with it. They'd be like, why is there a girl here? Because like I was pretty, I was thin, I had nice skin, I had nice hair, and like they just didn't know how to deal with it. And they would like shout things at me, and all I could do, my choice was either to crumble or draw strength from it, and so I just drew strength from it.
Wow, that's amazing, Jenny. Like you hear such horror stories, and look, I know it was extremely difficult. I'm sure it definitely continues to be, but you're so positive about it. It's really like so inspirational. And like I think I've heard you say before, like your existence as a trans woman is political, and it's amazing that you now do so much with politics and activism as well. I see that in the SU that you guys have a campaign at the moment about how Ireland has the worst trans healthcare in the EU. Now I had no idea about that, and I feel like I would be wellish read on LGBTQ plus issues, but I didn't realize that it was that bad in Ireland. Could you explain a bit about that and what the situation is like?
It is atrocious. Currently, there are three doctors in Loughlin Town Hospital that are superseding the World Health Organization in the guidelines of the administration of trans healthcare. It's the National Gender Service, which they called themselves that. No one gave them that name. They called themselves the National Gender Service. In order to get healthcare, currently there's a 10-year wait. I don't know I know our healthcare system's a bit, but I don't know anything else that it's 10 years to wait. And much like so many other things, the longer you wait, higher rates of suicide, the higher rates of mental health issues. And then at the end of the 10 years, you get to the National Gender Service in Town. They sit you down and they do a 4, 5, 6 hour psychological evaluation on you. And if you're deemed, there's people who've been turned away because they are autistic, that they couldn't possibly make decisions for themselves. There are people turned away because they have precarious housing situations. There are people turned away because they refuse to bring their parents with them despite being over 18 years of age. The trans people are not trusted with their bodies. And this is an absolute disgrace, and it's a scandal that this is happening. It is the most infuriating thing. They claim to be a holistic service. And I can speak from personal experience that when I went there with mental health difficulties, I was told to come back in 6 months' time. And that was it. And the reason why it justifies its existence is because, we provide loads of different supports as well as healthcare. When I can tell you firsthand that I was not supported. And I was completely left down and I was abandoned. Thankfully, when I applied, and on my 17th birthday, I was put on a waiting list, and I was seen when I was 20 something. I'm a lucky one, and I'm lucky that I could sit there in that chair, smile, tell them what they wanted to hear, so I could get the medication I knew I wanted and knew I needed. And I'm existing proof that I was right. And I knew I was just as trans as when I went on that waiting list at 17 as I am now to this day. And it is because of hormones that I am better, and I am a more rounded person, and I'm a more stable person, and I can achieve things, and I can do things like everyone else and reach the milestones of everyone else. But because of this system that is in place, and politicians from across the political spectrum being afraid to say the word trans, that this suffering continues.
Thinking about politicians in Ireland, I could probably count on one hand how many times I've heard them talk about trans people. It's so unspoken of, and that is such a huge issue in itself. Like, in order for people, the public, to be more familiar with it, to understand it, to get that compassion that they need to have, it needs to be spoken about. Like, I think about the referendum to repeal the Eighth Amendment, right? Abortion was such a taboo word before that whole campaign began. It was spoken about morning, noon, and night for about 6 months, and it is still taboo, but it is slightly less taboo. What do you think needs to be done for trans people in Ireland? Like, how can we begin that conversation?
It's hard because I remember also during the abortion referendum, it was deeply traumatizing to be around at that time and to be involved in that. My God, was it upsetting. I was in an all boys school. I would be sat in my religion class and it was me versus the entire class of being like, oh my God, it's abortion access and abortions happen whether you like it or not. And we need to be providing the supports. And a few people stood up and were in support, but the vast majority either said nothing or just wouldn't do it. And I was told by the teacher that no, it wasn't going to pass. I think the Irish, once again, this optimism that I have, I think the Irish people are kinder and more forgiving than politicians will give us credit for. And I think that's the same with trans people. We voted 63% for marriage equality, 66% for abortion access. And yes, there's been a global move to the right. And yes, conservatism amongst white women is often dominated by anti-trans rhetoric. But that doesn't exist within a vacuum. Those things are interconnected because they will find wedge issues. If white women will care for immigrants, then we'll put trans women against them. Or if black people you can target them by saying, okay, but what the illegal ones? It's not about the actual people and not about finding the real cause of issues. It's about who can I get the most reaction out of. And once we wake up to that and catch ourselves in that line of thinking of this gender essentialism, of this, it's hard to see where we can be in a conversation when we are on such a back foot. But we've been on a back foot before. Trinity College Dublin was where the first LGBT society in Ireland was founded. Trinity College Dublin was where the sexual liberation movement in Ireland was founded. It was just down the road, the Hirschfeld Centre, gay community centre, in the 80s. And so we can do better and we can come out of it. But it's about, right now, I think it's about having those difficult conversations and trying to pull people back to earth and remind them of the hope and the love that they have.
How do you deal with transphobia yourself? Do you feel like there has been a rise in it recently, or have you noticed any change?
I mean, every time I do anything, I've been on national television, on morning shows, on the news, on national radio. Every time I do anything, it's, even if I'm not talking about being trans, it's me being trans that is being attacked. Like, I've been on only talking about student housing. The word trans has not come up, but because of my existence in the space, that is enough of an attack that people must call this university and call for my resignation. There's people that call the comms office of Trinity and say, you need to get rid of her. She is a threat to women and children. Because these people, they don't have an issue with my actions or my thoughts, because if they did, they would be against me overseeing the union that doubles period poverty funding for women and people that menstruate. They'd be against me that has led the first person since repeal to push that the union go even further in demanding further access to abortion. If they really care about women, then they would care about trans women.
We see that kind of a narrative play out consistently. It's just heartbreaking to see these negative voices, these transphobic voices seem to shout so loud, and yet, as you said, we do not give Irish people enough credit for the compassion and the space that they can hold for people of all different kinds of backgrounds. And we literally have the numbers to prove that. Like, we have the referendums which prove that. And yet it's just so disheartening to see. I think social media platforms have a lot to answer for in pushing these voices, but you're right, you just need to have those difficult conversations, actually the in-person conversations that should matter the most, to create more positive, more welcoming, more open society for everybody. And I do hope that there will be a shift in this. I'm wondering what your hopes are for the future of Ireland as a trans person.
I hope we can put away our differences and focus on what unites us. And that is those downtimes. It is in these downtimes and in these struggles that I think it actually exposes that we are more alike, that we all are on the back foot. We are all people who have been abandoned. We are all people who have been sent abroad. We have all people who just want healthcare, just want housing, just want dignity, just want love. And as soon as we realize that, it'll be very dangerous and there'll be multiple people trying to stop that. But as soon as we realize that, my God, we'll achieve the Ireland that generations and generations really wanted.
You mentioned in your intro that you enjoy doing a bit of comedy. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I think you said you do a bit of improv. Do you think being Irish makes you a better comedian?
I think being Irish makes me better in every sense of the word, and so I'm glad you brought that up. But I think being Irish and doing improv is incredibly mortifying. You're just playing pretend on the stage, and it's something that Americans do because they have no cop on, whereas Irish people should have a bit more cop on than playing pretend. But my God, I love playing pretend. It's so much fun. I do a lot of stand up now, but I think there's so many great people in the Irish comedy scene that are just like, who are weird and who are, I think the best ones are the ones that are just like unapologetically themselves and in turn unapologetically Irish and just so stupid. Like being unapologetically Irish does, of course, mean you're influenced by the outside sources because, this island has sold itself out for European Union and the Yanks, God bless them. And so it's about seeing where you fit in between them when everything is pushing in on itself.
And there's comedy in that. You can find it in that
Yeah.
little space. You said being Irish makes you better at everything. Can you talk a bit about that?
I love Irish people that take themselves too seriously. I'm like, what are you doing? You've been given such a gift by being like, what other countries like people think you are a mythical creature? That's so calm. That's so calm. Why are you so serious and pretending just to be a Brit? But take the opportunity and just look around and realize that nothing's that serious. It's the same thing with, I've never made this comparison. It's the same thing with being queer, that like when you're queer, like what do you mean you want to get married and settle down with kids? Be gay, do poppers, do crime, have fun. And like listen to Charlie XCX. I don't know what gay people do, but like just like don't take yourself too seriously because the moment you do, you just let yourself down. And I think there's so much joy in not taking things too seriously. And I think being Irish and the reason why people like Irish people because of their niceness is because they're just trying to have fun and they're just trying to get by. And we forget that all the time. Stop trying to be American, stop trying to be British. That is my number one. I'm gonna change the posters outside the union, and that's what it's gonna say.
Do you speak Irish? You're a Gaeilgeoir, are you?
I'm a fluent drunk Irish speaker, but I care a lot about Irish, and in this job it's the first time we've had a full-time Irish language officer in the union this year.
Do you? I didn't know. I used to do that job as
We
well.
have a full-time Irish language officer. So we have 6 sabbatical officers, including the Ifiach na Gaeilge. And it was
Wow.
voted on in a referendum. 90% of students voted in favor of it. It had more turnout than the BDS referendum in 2018. Huge support for it. And so everything we do in the union, this Sanentus this year is As Gaeilge agus as Béarla. I think there's friction in that, and I think like our Ifiach na Gaeilge could talk about this for hours, and I think I'm guilty of it too, of the colonial brain of being like, okay, but everyone speaks English. Okay, but why? Why do they speak English? Because every notice they're ever given, because every area of their life is in English, because Irish is segregated in education to just being a subject instead of a language for which you can do other things. It's it's crazy. And I think when we do equality stuff, like the college has been taught that they have to care about equality, whereas when you talk to them about Guelga, they are carrying in every terrible student, every terrible teacher that they had, every kind of negative voice or experience that we self-deprecate and we put down about the language. And you're challenging their understanding of Irishness, of putting nationalism within a language context onto the table again for the first time in their working lives often, or at least they pretend it is. And so it's crazy that what you come up against. And I often get tense when I'm like, I need this graphic to go out and people to click. People have such limited attention spans, and so if we have the Irish one first, they're not going to read the English one. But there are things that are more important, such as telling yourself to shut up and stop being a shonen.
In a sense, like, yes, there's a lot of negativity people carry with Irish, like you said, from school, and that's such a shame. But I think people are starting to shed that away now. And I love to hear that there's a full-time Irish language officer in the Students' Union, because it shows the priority or the importance that we are giving the language. I think that's really, really positive. There's so many other part-time officers which haven't been made full-time, but the Irish language one has. I mean, what does that say? You said 90% voted yes, and the turnout was one of the highest. Like that's incredible. It really shows that the students value Irish and they recognize the importance of it. So yeah, put those posts out in Irish first. Like, I think people have that interest there. That's why this podcast exists. It's this idea of like people have this renewed interest in Irish language, culture, Irishness, and everything that comes with it. And in the modern sense of what is it today? What does it mean to be Irish today? Jenny, I want to ask you this last question, which I ask everyone. What does it mean for you to be Irish?
To be Irish is to get back up when everyone tells you not to. It's to realize that life isn't that serious, but I take not being serious very serious.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Any closing remarks?
Go out and vote today. Make sure to vote for yourself. Vote for the most vulnerable person in your life. And remember that voting is just one day of the year, and there's 364 days of other political action you can take and you should take.
Thank you so much, Jenny. I really appreciate you coming into the studio today, and I'm excited to see what you do next, because you're absolutely fantastic. Or Mila Mahagat.
Thank you, Anna Mila.